30 years ago, an entire town suddenly disappeared. No ruins, no survivors, no records. Maps were changed, and the government claimed the town never existed. But beneath the desert, something was still there waiting. Good evening, and welcome back. There are places in the world that are hard to find. And then, there are places that are not meant to be found at all. If you open a modern map of the United States, Google Maps, government records, even satellite imagery, you will see highways stretching across the land, cities clearly marked, towns carefully named. But somewhere in the vast emptiness of the American Southwest, there is a gap. No name, no boundary, no record, and yet, people once lived there. This is the story of a town that officially does not exist. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a glitch. I was comparing census maps from the late 1980s with modern demographic data, tracking population shifts, ghost towns, and economic collapses. Most towns disappear slowly. Numbers shrink. Schools close. Businesses leave. But this place did not fade. It vanished. On a 1987 federal infrastructure map, there was a small town marked just off a desert highway. It had a name, a population count, and even a municipal code. On a 1992 map, the name was blurred. On a 1995 map, the town was gone. The highway bent slightly, as if it had always avoided something that was no longer there. That was the moment I realized this was not an accident. Towns do not disappear like this. They leave behind ruins, records, stories. Natural disasters are documented. Economic failures are explained. Even nuclear test sites are acknowledged. But this town left nothing. No evacuation notices. No disaster reports. No official explanation. It was erased mid-sentence. Finding the town's name took weeks. It was not indexed. It did not appear in search engines. Every database search returned errors, not empty results but system failures. Eventually, I found it written by hand in the notebook of a retired civil engineer who worked on desert road systems in the late 1980s. The name was faint, almost scratched out. For legal and safety reasons, we will refer to it only as Town X. Town X was small, with an estimated population between 3,000 and 4,500 people. It had a school, a grocery store, a diner, a post office, and a water tower. It looked like any other quiet desert town. But beneath it, there was something else. Something that never appeared on any map. When I began contacting nearby counties, I expected confusion. Instead, I encountered silence. A former sheriff's assistant told me there had never been a town there, then immediately ended the call. A librarian paused for a long time before quietly saying she did not think I should be asking about it. One man whispered that some places are removed for a reason, and then there were the ones who remembered too much. He contacted me after I posted a single question on an obscure history forum. His message arrived at 3:11 in the morning. He said he was born there. He said he still dreamed about it. He said they were told to forget. For his safety, we will call him Daniel. We spoke using an encrypted call. He refused video. There was almost no crime. Daniel described Town X as quiet, too quiet. No homelessness. Outsiders passed through, but they never stayed long. When I asked why, he hesitated. Then he said something strange. He said the town listened. Daniel explained that there was a sound. Low and constant. You could not hear it with your ears, but you could feel it. It came from beneath the ground. According to him, Town X existed for a single purpose. Not mining. Not officially military testing. Beneath the town was a facility built deep into the bedrock, older than the town itself. Construction had begun before anyone moved in. The residents were placed on top of it. The facility had no official name. Locals called it the site. Children were warned never to talk about it. Adults pretended it did not exist. But at night, the ground sometimes vibrated. And sometimes, people changed. The official explanation claims Town X was abandoned due to economic unviability. Daniel told a different story. People did not move away, he said. They stopped being there. Teachers failed to show up for work. Store owners left doors unlocked. Cars were found parked with keys still inside. School attendance logs, one of the few surviving documents, show entire classrooms marked absent on the same day with no explanation. By late 1989, unmarked federal vehicles began arriving. No insignia, no announcements. The town was told it was routine geological research. Then fences went up. Roadblocks followed. Finally, a verbal evacuation order was given. Nothing was written. Families were told what to pack. They were told what to forget. Records were confiscated. Photographs were destroyed. People were separated. Daniel was 12 years old when he left Town X. He never saw his best friend again. In 1991, Town X was removed from federal systems. Not archived. Deleted. Postal routes were rerouted. Land ownership reverted briefly to the state, then vanished into restricted jurisdiction. Satellite images from that period are missing, not blurred, but gone. Even today, if you search the location where Town X once stood, you will see only empty desert. No ruins. No foundations. No roads. As if nothing had ever existed there. Why erase a town so completely? Economic failure does not require secrecy. Disasters leave records. But Town X left nothing, except memories. And one final piece of evidence. Before our call ended, Daniel told me they recorded everything. When I asked who, he said the site. Then he sent me an audio file. It was dated August 17, 1990. Along with it came a warning. Once you hear it, he said, you will understand why the town had to disappear. The signal of Town X. The file Daniel sent was small, just under 4 minutes long. No filer name, no metadata, only a date stamped into the audio itself, August 17, 1990. There was no message attached, no explanation, just the warning he had already given me. Once you hear it, he said, you will understand why the town had to disappear. At first, the recording sounded like nothing. A low hiss, the kind you hear on old tapes or broken radios. I almost dismissed it as corrupted data. But then I noticed something strange. The hiss was not random. It pulsed. Slowly. Rhythmically. Like breathing. Underneath it, there was a second sound. Deeper. Almost subsonic. It was not loud, but it pressed against the ears in an uncomfortable way. Even at low volume, it caused a faint pressure in the chest. This was not background noise. This was intentional. Then, about 40 seconds in, the voices began. They were distant, muffled, at first, impossible to understand. But as the tape progressed, the voices grew clearer, as if something was moving closer to the microphone. I isolated the audio and cleaned it digitally. What emerged made my hands stop moving. They were counting. Not together. Not in unison. Different voices, at different speeds, overlapping each other. Some counted forward. Others backward. Some repeated the same number over and over again, as if they were stuck. And then there was a scream. It lasted less than a second. Sharp, panicked, human. Immediately after it ended, the low pulsing sound grew stronger. The voices stopped all at once, as if something had silenced them. The tape ended abruptly. No fade out, no conclusion. I sent the audio to an independent sound engineer, someone with experience analyzing military and industrial recordings. I did not tell him where it came from. 2 days later, he called me directly instead of emailing. His voice was tense. He told me the low-frequency sound was not natural. It did not match earthquakes, machinery, or known geological activity. It appeared to be generated deliberately, and it fluctuated in a pattern similar to neurological stimulation frequencies. When I asked him what that meant, he hesitated. He said those frequencies are sometimes used in experiments involving the human nervous system, mood alteration, disorientation, memory interference. I asked him about the voices. He said the voices sounded distressed but controlled, as if the speakers were aware they were being recorded, as if they were participating in something they did not fully understand. Then he asked me one question. Where did you get this? I did not answer. That night, I dreamed of Town X for the first time. I had never been there, but in the dream, I knew the streets. I knew the diner. I knew the sound beneath the ground. When I woke up, I had the overwhelming sense that something had been listening. I contacted Daniel again. At first, he did not respond. When he finally did, his messages were short. Nervous. He told me the tape was only one of many recordings. The site recorded everything. Sound, movement, heart rates, sleep patterns. I asked him why. He said because they were not studying the town. They were studying what happened when people were exposed to the signal for long periods of time. According to Daniel, the signal had been active long before the town was built. The town was not created to hide the facility. It was created to surround it, to feed it data. Families, children, generations. Town X was never meant to last. People began reporting strange symptoms in the late 1980s. Headaches that would not go away, shared dreams, moments of lost time, entire conversations forgotten minutes after they ended. Some residents became withdrawn. Others became obsessively calm even during emergencies. Daniel told me about a teacher who stood in front of a class one day and began repeating the same sentence over and over again, slowly, quietly, until someone led her out of the room. He told me about a man who walked into the desert at night and never came back. He told me about his own mother, who sometimes stared at the floor for hours, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Doctors could not explain it. Outside specialists were brought in. Then they stopped coming. Shortly after that, the federal vehicles arrived. Daniel said the evacuation was not about safety. It was about containment. Something had gone wrong. The signal had intensified. The site had lost control of whatever balance they were trying to maintain. People were not just being affected temporarily anymore. Some were no longer responding at all. I asked Daniel what happened to those people. He did not answer at first. Then he said something I will never forget. They stayed behind, he said, or what was left of them did. The official evacuation removed most of the population. But not everyone left. Some were deemed unfit to move. Others were taken directly into the facility. Their names do not appear on any relocation lists. They became part of the site. After listening to the tape again, I noticed something new. Near the end of the recording, just before the voices stopped, there was a whisper, almost lost beneath the pulse. I slowed it down and filtered everything else out. The whisper was clear. It said, "It hears us." That was the moment I understood why Town X had been erased. Whatever existed beneath that town was not just being studied. It was listening. It may still be listening now. After the tape, I stopped thinking of Town X as a missing town. I started thinking of it as a lid, something built to cover what was underneath. The deeper I searched, the more fragmented the records became. Construction permits from the early 1970s referenced subsurface geological stabilization. Budget allocations were rerouted through 3 separate federal departments. None of them listed the final project destination. The paper trail did not disappear. It dissolved. Then I found the first blueprint. It was incomplete. Half of it had been scanned poorly, as if someone wanted it preserved but unreadable. What remained showed a structure descending far deeper than necessary for storage or research. Elevators, reinforced chambers, circular rooms arranged around a central shaft, and at the bottom something labeled only as Chamber 0. Daniel had never mentioned that name. When I asked him about it, he went silent for nearly a full day. When he finally responded, he sent only one sentence. That's where the signal came from. According to archived contractor invoices, the site was completed before the first families moved into Town X. Workers were brought in from outside the state. Most stayed less than 6 months. Several names on the payroll later appeared in unrelated federal positions. Others vanished from employment history altogether. But one name remained, Dr. Elias Vance, a neuroscientist with a background in acoustic cognition and behavioral response to low-frequency vibration. In the early 1980s, he published several academic papers suggesting that certain sound frequencies could influence emotional states, alter perception of time, and even disrupt memory formation. His work was controversial. Funding was cut. Then he disappeared from the academic world. Years later, his signature appeared on a supply requisition form for equipment delivered to a restricted desert facility. The site, Through a retired archivist, I obtained fragments of internal correspondence. Most of it was heavily redacted, but one paragraph remained untouched. It read, "Initial exposure trials indicate measurable synchronization between subjects. Group dream reports are statistically identical. Recommend long-term immersion study." Group dream reports. That explained what Daniel had described. Residents dreaming the same dreams, feeling the same unease, experiencing simultaneous lapses in awareness. The signal was not random. It was tuning them. The blueprint of Chamber 0 showed a massive circular array embedded into the bedrock. Not speakers, not antennas. Something far more complex. The central structure resembled a resonance chamber, designed not just to emit sound, but to amplify it through the surrounding earth, which meant the desert itself became part of the system. I began to understand why the town had been placed directly above it. The population was not collateral. It was calibration. Families provided generational exposure. Children born into the signal would react differently than adults arriving later. Over time, researchers could measure adaptation, resistance, synchronization. Town X was not an accident. It was an experiment measured in decades. But something changed in 1989. Internal memos shifted tone. Words like unexpected amplification and feedback instability appeared repeatedly. One message referenced external source interference, though it did not clarify what that meant. Then there was a final note from Dr. Vance himself. The resonance is no longer localized. It is responding. Responding to what? That question kept me awake for nights. When I asked Daniel if he remembered anything unusual during the final months before evacuation, he described an incident that had never appeared in any record. He said the sky felt wrong. Not visually. Not dramatically. Just subtly distorted. As if sound was bending something in the air. Radios malfunctioned. Dogs howled constantly. Compasses failed within a 2-mile radius of the site. And then the dreams stopped. All at once. Instead, there was silence. Complete silence beneath the ground. Daniel said that silence was worse than the sound had ever been, because it meant something had changed direction. Instead of broadcasting outward, the signal had begun pulling inward. The final weeks before evacuation were chaotic. People reported hearing whispers from empty rooms. Some claimed to recognize their own voices speaking from underground. Others became convinced that the town itself was alive. When federal teams arrived, they did not act surprised. They acted prepared. Containment units were established around the site. Specialized equipment was moved below ground. Daniel remembers seeing large cylindrical containers brought in under heavy guard. He does not know what was inside them. Shortly before evacuation, a partial lockdown occurred. Certain residents, those showing advanced synchronization symptoms, were separated from their families. Those individuals were not placed on buses. They were escorted into the facility. I searched every relocation registry I could access. Those names do not exist anywhere after 1990. No death certificates. No social security activity. No trace. Then I found something buried deep in a declassified environmental survey conducted years later in the same region. The report mentioned residual acoustic anomalies detected at depth. It recommended no further drilling in the area. No further drilling, as if they were afraid of disturbing something. I returned to the tape again. This time I examined the pulsing pattern frame by frame. There was a sequence embedded within it. Not random fluctuation, but structured intervals, like a message encoded in vibration. I sent the sequence to a mathematician specializing in signal decoding. He ran it through multiple pattern recognition systems. 3 days later he called me. The pattern was not binary, not Morse code, not standard encryption. It resembled a neural waveform. Specifically, the pattern matched human brain activity recorded during REM sleep. The signal beneath Town X was mimicking dreaming. Or worse, it was learning from it. The final document I uncovered was a termination notice for project oversight, dated early 1991. The closure summary was only 1 sentence long. Subject environment no longer controllable. Recommend immediate erasure. Not shutdown. Not containment. Erasure. The site was never dismantled. Satellite imagery suggests the surface structures were removed, But underground architecture of that scale does not simply vanish. Which means Chamber Zero is still there. Whatever was amplified, whatever responded, whatever learned, it is still beneath the desert. And if the signal truly adapted to the minds above it, then evacuation may not have ended the experiment. It may have completed it, because the residents of Town X did not just leave with memories, they carried something with them. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough, I can almost feel it too. A low, distant pulse. Waiting. By the time the evacuation order came, the town was already unraveling. There was no siren, no official announcement broadcast over loudspeakers. Instead, it happened quietly, door to door. Federal agents in plain clothes, accompanied by uniformed personnel who did not identify their branch. They carried clipboards, sealed envelopes, and expressions that revealed nothing. Daniel remembers the knock, 3 sharp taps at 6 in the morning. His mother opened the door. 2 men stood outside. One spoke calmly, almost politely. They informed her that due to environmental instability, the town would undergo temporary relocation. She was told to pack essential belongings only. No electronics, no personal records, no photo albums. Transportation would arrive within the hour. There was no written notice left behind. No explanation offered. Across Town X, the same script unfolded. Families rushed to gather clothes, medication, important documents. But when they tried to take certain items, they were stopped. Agents checked bags before loading them onto buses. Boxes of photographs were confiscated. Filing cabinets were emptied and removed separately. It was not an evacuation. It was a purge. Daniel remembers looking toward the edge of town and seeing the road blocked by military vehicles. Beyond them, the desert stretched endlessly. No one was allowed to leave independently. Everyone moved together, under supervision. But something else was happening at the same time. Near the center of town, around the fenced perimeter of the site, activity intensified. Additional trucks arrived, unmarked, heavy-duty, reinforced. Groups of residents were escorted away from the buses and redirected toward the underground entrance. These were not random selections. They were the ones who had reported severe symptoms, the ones who had sleep disturbances, the ones who had spoken about hearing whispers or feeling connected to something beneath the ground. Daniel saw his teacher among them. She was calm, too calm. Her expression was distant, almost serene. When her sister tried to reach her, she did not react. She simply followed the agents without resistance. No one on the buses was told what was happening to those taken below. Questions were met with silence. The evacuation convoy left Town X just before noon. Buses escorted by armed vehicles traveled west for nearly 3 hours before arriving at a temporary relocation center in another state. Residents were processed, documented, reassigned. They were instructed to say they had relocated due to economic collapse. They were instructed not to speak about the facility. They were instructed not to contact media. Most complied. Not because they were threatened openly, but because the fear had already taken root. In the weeks that followed, former residents reported unusual follow-up visits. Officials checked on their mental health, conducted interviews under the guise of wellness assessments. Some families were offered financial incentives to relocate farther away from each other. It was strategic dispersion. If there had been shared experiences, shared dreams, they were determined to break the pattern. Daniel says the dreams stopped for a while after leaving Town X. Then, months later, they returned. But they were different. Before, the dreams had been synchronized. Similar imagery, identical symbols, a shared sense of presence. After relocation, the dreams became fragmented, personal, as if whatever had been beneath the town was now reaching outward, searching individually. Some former residents reported hearing low humming sounds in places where no machinery existed. Others described brief moments of lost time returning unexpectedly. A few tried to reconnect with neighbors from Town X. Many of those attempts failed. Phone numbers were disconnected. Addresses led to empty properties. In several cases, individuals who had been confirmed on evacuation manifests did not appear in official relocation records at all. It was as if parts of the population had been quietly removed from history a second time. I attempted to track the names of those taken into the site on the final day. There were no transfer logs, no detention records, no death certificates. But there was one anomaly. A shipment manifest dated 2 days after the evacuation referenced biological containment units transported from the desert facility to an undisclosed research location. The destination field was redacted. The weight listed on the manifest was far heavier than empty containers would suggest. Whatever had happened underground did not end with the town's closure. It was moved. Daniel told me something else about that final morning. As the buses began to pull away, he looked back through the window. He expected to see chaos, smoke, military presence. Instead, he saw something far stranger. The town looked normal, still, peaceful, as if no one had ever lived there. The water tower stood against the sky. The diner sign remained intact. Even the school playground looked undisturbed. But there were no people, no movement. Just empty buildings, arranged neatly around a fenced perimeter that hid the entrance to something far deeper. Within weeks, demolition crews removed surface structures. Buildings were dismantled methodically, roads were torn up, utility lines severed. By the end of 1991, satellite images showed nothing but desert. No debris, no foundation outlines, as if the earth had swallowed the town whole. Officially, the land was reclassified under restricted federal jurisdiction. Unofficially, it became a blank space. Former residents scattered across the country attempted to rebuild their lives. Some succeeded, others struggled with unexplained anxiety, insomnia, and recurring auditory hallucinations. At least 3 were admitted to psychiatric facilities after insisting that something was still communicating with them. Medical evaluations listed stress-induced delusion. No one investigated further. Years later, when I asked Daniel what frightened him most about that day, he did not mention the soldiers. He did not mention the separation. He mentioned the silence. He said that as the buses drove away, he realized he could no longer feel the pulse beneath the ground. And that absence felt wrong. Because if the signal had truly stopped, the site would not have needed erasure. It would have needed repair. Which means the evacuation was not about shutting something down. It was about hiding the moment it changed. And somewhere beneath the desert, beyond the reach of maps and memory, whatever was awakened in Chamber Zero was no longer contained by the town built above it. The experiment did not fail. It evolved. For years, the official explanation for Town X was simple: economic decline. That was the phrase used in every redirected document. Budget shortfalls, loss of infrastructure viability, gradual relocation due to unsustainable development. It sounded ordinary, believable, safe. But the deeper I searched, the more fragile that explanation became. There were no bankruptcy filings for the town, no state emergency assistance requests, no agricultural failure reports. Tax records showed steady revenue until the final quarter before evacuation. In fact, infrastructure upgrades had been approved just months before the town vanished. You do not invest in a town you plan to abandon, unless abandonment was never the plan. I filed formal information requests through every federal channel available. Most were denied. Some returned heavily redacted pages, black ink covering entire paragraphs. But one response arrived incomplete. It contained a financial audit summary of a project never publicly disclosed. The code name was Echo Basin Initiative. The location field was blank, but the budget numbers matched exactly with the infrastructure spending in Town X during the 1970s and 80s. Echo Basin was not an economic project. It was a research initiative, and according to the audit, it had exceeded expected results prior to termination. Exceeded expected results. That phrase kept repeating in my mind. If the project had succeeded beyond expectation, why erase it? Unless the success itself had become the problem. Through a former contractor who agreed to speak anonymously, I learned that Echo Basin was not designed merely to test acoustic influence on human behavior. It was part of a broader hypothesis. The hypothesis suggested that human consciousness, when exposed to synchronized vibrational patterns, could begin to align across individuals. Thoughts, emotions, even dream states could resonate in measurable ways. In other words, consciousness could be networked. Town X was not just a study of sound. It was a study of collective mind. The contractor told me that early results showed promising synchronization among residents. Shared imagery in dreams. Identical emotional spikes recorded across different households at the same time. Subtle but undeniable alignment. But then something unexpected occurred. The alignment stopped being one-directional. Instead of residents synchronizing with the signal began synchronizing with them. Data logs reportedly showed fluctuating waveform adjustments that mirrored emotional states of the town population. When fear spiked, the signal altered. When calm spread, the frequency stabilized. It was reacting, learning. The moment that terrified researchers was not when people reported hearing whispers. It was when the equipment began producing patterns no engineer had programmed. Autonomous modulation. The site was no longer controlling the resonance chamber. The chamber was adapting itself. That was the real reason for the evacuation. Containment had failed. And worse, removal of the population did not stop the phenomenon. Internal reports indicated residual activity continued even after the town was cleared. With no subjects present, the signal maintained structured output. It pulsed in repeating sequences, as if expecting input that no longer arrived. Like a conversation waiting for a response. That was when the order came down. Erasure protocol. Destroy surface evidence. Relocate essential research materials. Seal chamber 0. But sealing something is not the same as stopping it. Satellite analysis years later revealed subtle heat signatures beneath the desert in the same coordinates where Town X once stood. Not strong enough to suggest active facility operations. But consistent. Persistent. As if something below ground still generated energy. The final lie was not that the town failed economically. The final lie was that the experiment ended. Because while Town X disappeared from maps, its residents did not disappear from existence. They carried exposure histories. They carried altered neural patterns. If the hypothesis about synchronized consciousness was accurate, then the experiment was no longer limited to one geographic location. It had dispersed. Former residents settled across multiple states. Some unknowingly moved into positions of influence. Teachers, technicians, analysts, parents raising children who had been exposed to low-frequency resonance during critical developmental years. What if the experiment's true objective was never containment within the desert? What if Town X was Phase 1, a closed environment to test amplification? And Phase 2 required diffusion, a scattered network. I revisited the environmental survey that warned against further drilling. In the appendix there was a single handwritten notation not included in the typed summary. Resonance persists despite subject removal. Subject removal. That meant the population was officially classified as subjects. Not citizens. Not residents. Subjects. The deeper truth began to take shape. Town X was never destroyed to hide failure. It was erased to hide proof. Proof that consciousness can be influenced. Proof that synchronized exposure can produce collective neural patterns. Proof that something beneath Chamber 0 responded when thousands of human minds aligned above it. The most unsettling possibility emerged last. If the signal learned from the town and the town was dispersed, then fragments of that learned pattern may now exist within the population itself. Not as sound, not as noise, but as subtle influence. A tendency toward shared thought, shared reaction, shared emotional wave. We have seen moments in modern history where entire populations react in near unison. Emotional surges spreading instantly across cities and nations. Panic, euphoria, fear. We attribute it to media, to technology. But what if the groundwork for synchronization began decades earlier, in a town that no longer exists? I asked Daniel one final question. If the site was sealed, if the chamber was abandoned, what does he think remains beneath the desert? He did not hesitate this time. It's not waiting down there, he said. It's waiting up here. The official story says Town X collapsed economically and was forgotten. But economic collapse does not erase satellite images. It does not delete birth records. It does not require silence that lasts 30 years. The lie was never meant to convince investigators. It was meant to be simple enough that no one would look deeper. Because if the truth were acknowledged, if it were proven that collective consciousness can be shaped, amplified, and perhaps even directed, then Town X would not be a forgotten experiment. It would be the beginning of something far larger, and the desert would not be a graveyard. It would be a birthplace. 30 years after Town X vanished, the desert looks unchanged. Wind moves across empty land. Heat rises in quiet waves. Satellite images show nothing but dust and rock stretching for miles. No buildings. No roads. No trace of human settlement. But absence can be misleading. Somewhere beneath that surface lies reinforced concrete, steel frameworks, sealed chambers, and a resonance array embedded deep into the bedrock. Chamber 0 was never excavated. It was never dismantled. It was buried. And buried does not mean inactive. In the years following the evacuation, minor geological surveys in surrounding counties reported subtle irregularities. Compasses drifting slightly off true north. Audio equipment registering low-frequency interference during unrelated experiments. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy, just enough to suggest something beneath the desert still hummed quietly to itself. I traveled as close as legally possible to the coordinates where Town X once stood. The road ends miles before the restricted zone. Warning signs mark the perimeter. No trespassing. Federal property. Surveillance in use. The air there feels ordinary at first, until you stand still long enough. When the wind drops and silence settles, there is a sensation, not a sound exactly, but a pressure. A faint vibration too subtle to identify directly. It could be imagination. It could be expectation. Or it could be memory. Because what Town X proved, according to the documents, was that prolonged exposure to specific resonance patterns altered neural activity measurably. Long-term exposure did not simply fade when the signal stopped. Brain scans conducted on selected residents before evacuation showed structural adjustments in regions linked to perception and emotional regulation. Those changes do not reverse easily. The experiment may have ended geographically, but biologically it continued. Over the past decade, researchers across different fields have independently explored collective behavior patterns. Sudden synchronization of emotional states across populations. Rapid viral spread of identical thought structures. Shared dream reports during periods of global stress. No one connects these phenomena to a small erased town in the desert. But perhaps they should. Daniel's dreams never fully stopped. He told me that sometimes he wakes up with the sense that something is anticipating him. Not watching. Not chasing. Anticipating. As if it expects him to remember something specific. Other former residents I managed to locate described similar sensations. Not identical dreams anymore, but recurring imagery, circular chambers, low humming corridors, a vast empty space beneath the earth, illuminated by dim light. One former resident, now in her 40s, said she sometimes feels compelled to count quietly when stressed. Forward, backward, overlapping sequences. She has no memory of where that habit began. I returned once more to the audio tape Daniel sent at the beginning of this investigation. I analyzed the final seconds again. The whisper we isolated, "It hears us," may not have been a warning. It may have been an observation, because the data from Echo Basin suggested something unprecedented. When thousands of minds were exposed to synchronized vibration over decades, the signal did not just influence them. It reflected them. Chamber 0 amplified patterns present in the population above it. Fear intensified the waveform. Calm stabilized it. Emotional surges altered its rhythm. In effect, the system beneath Town X became a mirror tuned to human consciousness. And when the residents were removed, that mirror did not shatter. It retained the patterns it had learned. Which raises a possibility, more unsettling than any conspiracy. What if the purpose of Town X was not to create influence, but to establish connection? If the resonance chamber achieved stable synchronization once, it may not require physical proximity anymore. Once mapped, neural patterns can be recreated. Once learned, rhythms can be projected. The desert installation may have been phase 1, calibration through isolation. Phase 2 may have required integration into a broader world. In the last few years, subtle anomalies have appeared in publicly available satellite datasets, momentary signal distortions over the restricted zone, brief thermal fluctuations inconsistent with ambient temperature shifts. Each anomaly is small. Each is dismissed as instrumentation error. But together, they form a pattern. Intermittent pulses. Waiting intervals. Almost as if something below ground activates periodically. Testing. Listening. And if the resonance system beneath Chamber 0 truly adapted to human thought patterns, it may not need a town above it anymore. It may only need people who once lived there. People scattered across cities, connected through invisible networks of communication and emotion. Because synchronization does not require proximity in an age where thought travels instantly through screens and signals. What if the experiment predicted this? What if Town X was not erased to hide failure, but to protect the timeline of a success too early to reveal? A technology capable of aligning emotional states across thousands would not remain buried forever. And if it already exists in fragments embedded within altered neural pathways of former residents, then the experiment lives on in ways impossible to measure directly. The final document I uncovered was never meant for public view. It was a closing remark in an internal assessment summary. It read, "Environmental isolation successful. Subject integration ongoing." Ongoing, not terminated, not concluded. Ongoing. Town X officially does not exist. Its records are gone. Its roads erased. Its buildings reduced to memory. But the people who lived there do exist. And if the resonance chamber beneath the desert once learned to mirror human consciousness, then perhaps it no longer needs physical presence to function. Perhaps it only needs attention. And perhaps every time we experience sudden collective fear, synchronized outrage, identical emotional waves spreading faster than logic can follow, we are hearing an echo. Not from beneath the desert, but from something that learned how we think. The town that does not exist may never appear on a map again. But if you ever find yourself in complete silence, and you feel a faint pressure in the air that you cannot explain, listen carefully. Because somewhere, deep beneath an empty stretch of desert, Chamber Zero may still be resonating. And it may still be listening,